Thanks, Jana. Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Quick executive summary for Benthic prayfish and what we've been doing, what a couple of us have been looking at. Gonna talk about some status as well as some research from this work. I mentioned yesterday about our prayfish working group and how we're trying to use that to get multiple boats involved and get a better feel for some spatial changes and how Benthic prayfish are actually, using some of the different habitats of Lake Ontario. Status on round Goby, it's kind of complicated, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Slimy Sculpin, the decline has actually finally stopped. In 2014, we saw a little bit of an uptick. Deepwater Sculpin are stable, and we actually have our first really deep data on that species, so that's kind of neat. So why care about round Goby? I've heard some other folks talking about them and their effect on the food web. Tim Johnson and Jim Hoyle have talked about them. Couple reasons. At one, they are the most abundant benthic prayfish right now in Lake Ontario. Here's a time series just illustrating the fish community based on our bottom trawl work in the fall. And this is based on biomass density. And what you can see is once very dominated by Slimy Sculpin and a few other native benthic fish, has really turned into a round Goby dominated system. You do see the ever increasing Deepwater Sculpin there too at the very top right corner of the graph. Excuse me. They're an energy vector. They're eating Dreissenids and sport fish are eating them. So we'll talk a little bit about their role in that way. And there's room for improvement. If you heard me talk about the pelagic prayfish, we're looking at these time series, multiple time series, to try to get a little bit more inference about different factors driving these populations. So we looked at a bunch of time series for gobies, and we maybe don't have a great one, but we have a lot of different ones. So they are a pathway from Dreissenids. If you looked at the diet, a lot of this is 2013 data from our intensive field year. This is whole time, the whole year perspective on the diet. At least 60, 75% Dreissenids in their diet by weight. Next most abundant is mysis, which is probably a little bit surprising to some thinking about Goby as sort of a near-shore fish. But in actuality, what we see in our trawl data is that there's this migration that's really dominating most of their lifetime, where you're spending a lot of the winter out at about 100 meters or more, big Dreissenid flats out there, consuming those. By June, they're actually moving inshore. You can still see a little bit of a, remaining hump there where they were. Moving inshore to spawn, spend most of the summer up in close to shore. And then by fall, this data is represented in October, they're starting to move back out. So that's really at least 6-7 months of their time offshore. That's where the mysis are coming in. They're also a popular diet item in Lake Ontario. No complex food web models or isotopes, just good old-fashioned diet data, looking at a bunch of different piscivores and how important round Goby are in their diet, just simple percents here by weight in the red bars. And then if you figure, okay, 75% of a Goby is a Dreissenid, that's what our sport fish are really, being made of from an invertebrate standpoint. So yellow perch, smallmouth bass, brown trout, probably not surprising to anyone, but making a big component of walleye. And you heard Dr. Lantry yesterday talk about their role in maybe changing lake trout reproductive success. So, and we did catch one Chinook that had a Goby in it, much to the anglers talk a lot about how they're eating Goby, but we found very limited evidence for that. So here are the 3 time series that we use to think about round Goby. If you've been here in the past, the upper time series is one my colleague Maureen Walsh has developed. And what you can see in, lining these up, really none of the peaks line up very well. If you notice, the densities of these lower two, the y-axes are similar, but the one above is actually, an order of magnitude less dense. So the top one is a spring survey, pretty seasonally appropriate because we think the catchability to the gear is good. consistent methods, but the trawl's not so good. It basically was designed to go over the benthic fish and not catch Dreissenids. But it gives us some trend data to understand. The next data series is actually using a couple different methods. Some of those have a much better and higher catchability based on the density numbers, but they're inconsistent through time, so we really have a little difficulty there. The final one is the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry's summer trawling series. And you can see there's some pretty good agreement from a density perspective, but again, you know, the peaks and the timing don't really line up. I laughed, I said, well, in 2014, round Goby density either declined, stayed about the same, or increased. So we have that one pretty well handled. But that's where we sit. It's complicated. We're trying to figure this out, trying to find which survey is going to work and how we can actually get at sort of their time series and what they're doing in the lake. A neat piece of attempt is OM&RF's deep electrofishing. So this is a picture here of a Deepwater. How deep is this photo taken, Mike? Any idea?
I don't know, it could be 20, 35 meters.
Sure, so this is looking to sample Goby in rocky habitats, places where we can't run our trawls, and we know those fish are. So here's an image with the no current turned on, and so basically this system works by exposing the fish to a current, getting them to move, flip over, videotaping that area, and being able to count density. So, excuse me, some preliminary data from this, you know, really demonstrates what we knew is, you know, out about 20, 40 meters in the summer, densities are fairly low, but they're much higher inshore. So thinking about their effect, really, it's, you know, in the summer, it's a near shore phenomenon. So, moving on to Deepwater Sculpin, I talked about trying to improve our time series and learn different things. On this graph, we're representing a depth-based model of Deepwater Sculpin density. This is the 2014 data. You see this little increase right around between 50 and 100 meters. Those are a lot of juvenile fish that we're catching, and then quite a few deep waters out deep. But what we never really understood is how does that go? Our trawls were stopping right around 175, 180 meters. Is that about the maximum density? Are there more? Are there less out there? So thanks to a lot of good work by our vessel crew, got a little bit more warp on the trawls, and we're able to actually tow out at 210 meters. And what we found out there were a lot of Deepwater Sculpin. So it was the highest densities we've recorded in a trawl out that deep. So definitely a species that whatever the judgment for them coming back is, they're certainly a very important part of the Lake Ontario community now. We are seeing them in a few lake trout diets, so interesting. So there's lots deep. If we look at the time series, though, we only really have consistent data from about 150 meters in. And so that time series shows a peak in 2012, and then, you know, a decline by 2013 and 2014. This is probably not this well graphed as a lake-wide density is probably about an order of magnitude too low because of just how many there are out in that deep hole. So 2014 similar to 2013. And then Slimy Sculpin, this is a figure showing the full time series for Slimy Sculpin, what was once the dominant benthic prey fish and has suffered a really significant decline. And if we zoom in with many, many zeros on the density of the y-axis, we actually see in 2014 we did catch a few more than we did in 2013. So I think maybe the decline of those species have actually stopped. One thing that's interesting about this is while I plotted on a lake-wide density, we've been working with some of the aquatic gap and some habitat models and looking at really, this is a phenomenon that colleagues Randy Owens and Dawn Dittman have written about, where it's really the highest densities were right around Oswego, and they were ridiculously high relative to other places in the Great Lakes. So that's one reason why we're hoping to get the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources boat, maybe the DEC boat out, and look in some of these other places for these benthic fish, as opposed to sort of our standard trawl sites that are just along the South Shore. So with that, I'll take any questions.